Thank you on behalf of the International Society for Quality of Life Studies for joining this webinar today, Happiness Research in Colombia, Lessons from a Paradoxically Happy Country. We'll introduce our esteemed speakers. Lina Martínez is an Associate Professor of Public Policy and Director of the Observatory of Public Policies, POLIS, at Universidad ISQOLS in Colombia. With a bachelor's in philosophy, a master's in education and human development, and a master's and PhD in public policy, Dr. Martínez conducts extensive research on subjective statistics, quality of life, urban policies, and subjective well-being. Her research seeks to have a policy impact on improving the quality of life in cities. Dr. Martínez has worked in the World Bank at the Inter-American Development Bank, served as a consultant for the national government in Colombia to design the national health policy and well-being, and directed an extensive measurement system to monitor and track the life satisfaction and its relationship with government performance. Adam Okulicz-Kozaryn was born in Poland. He's an assistant professor at public policy at Rutgers University in Camden, New Jersey in the United States. He obtained his PhD from the University of Texas at Dallas and served as a postdoctoral fellow at Harvard University's Institute for Quantitative Social Science. His work has covered a variety of topics, including income inequality, preferences for redistribution, urban and rural issues, cultural economics, values, religion, and happiness. He is also interested in information technology and computational social science, automation, data mining, data management, and text processing. He uses Linux, Python, and Stata. We are so thrilled to have these esteemed presenters with us today. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Lina and Adam.
And thank you, Jill. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. Sorry for the confusion. And we are so glad and happy to see you all here. We are going to talk about happiness and subjective well-being in Colombia. We have titled this presentation, Lessons from a Paradoxically Happy Country. I am based in Colombia. Adam is a person who has fallen in love with Colombia. And we have been conducting extensive research in the country. So from the point that we want to start is Colombia, as many other countries in Latin America, they don't have the same levels of development that the countries we've seen in all the World Happiness Report, which are in the top of happiness, like Scandinavian countries or first world countries. But in Latin America, we experience emotions and we experience happiness in a very different way. So we want to use Colombia as an example of the high ratings of life satisfaction and positive emotions that are experienced in the continent. Colombia is a good example. It has different nuances if we study other countries in the region, but this is a little bit of a taste of what is happiness in the region in Latin America. So with that, a little editorial on mine, we are going to start. This is pretty much Colombia. Besides all the bad news or the information you might have in Colombia, it has changed over the years. But in general, the general perception of Colombia is a very conflicted country. We have war, we have drug trafficking, and that's true. But not to that extent of the information that is available for someone who is not living in the country. But this is pretty much Colombia. We have blessed with nature. We have different landscapes. We are beautiful. And we are populated by happy people. If you come here, the vibe, the atmosphere is pretty much of very happy people, very kind, very smiling persons wherever you go. We have found in different data sets that the happiness levels in Colombia are quite high. For instance, in the World Happiness data set from 2010-2019, happiness was about 8.1. We also have the survey, the World Survey Values is 8.3, but this is in the variable of happiness, not the country leather variable, which is a very Western measure for subjective well-being. We prefer in Latin America to use life satisfaction to measure what to capture what is for us the essence of subjective well-being rather than the country leather. This is a completely different discussion that we have here as researchers in Latin America, because the country leather, the best possible life, captures pretty well what happened in industrialized countries, but it doesn't capture all the nuances of subjective well-being in the region. This information that I'm showing here is the quality of life survey. This is data collected in the country by DANE, which is the National Statistics. And here we have the ratings for happiness, for life satisfaction, purpose, and the country leather, which is the best possible life. The trajectory here goes from 2017 to 2023. And as you can see, happiness are quite high. The sample size of the survey is large. It's a national representative survey that has 3 or 4 waves collected each year. And we saw a dip in happiness pretty much due to COVID. We are bouncing back to baseline levels. Same goes to life satisfaction, even though it has been reducing. Life satisfaction scores are quite high. Probably for other countries, especially Western countries, life satisfaction could be around 7. We pretty much keep at 8 and upper 7s. Purpose is among the variables of subjective well-being the highest. And here we have the Western measure of country, which is the lowest because we don't have all the services and the conditions that provide developed countries. Another point that I would like to make here, why studying Latin America, and particularly Colombia, is because in the region, probably we're one of the few countries that has information, very granular information for life satisfaction. There is also Chile. Mexico has very good data. But to make studies for life satisfaction and for subjective well-being, you need the granularity and you need the data to do it. And Colombia is a good example of that. So we have national representative data sets, we have the Gallup information, and we also have a very granular information from one city, which is Cali, the 3rd largest city in Colombia, that we are going to show in a moment. But Colombia has a pretty good data set. And the presentation today is not one paper, which is usually what we do in this kind of presentations. What we want to do is to present the extent of the different papers that Alan and I have been working over the years and what we have learned from there. So it is not just one particular paper, it's different analysis, and we are using different data sets. We are going to make just to make the clarification when it's the case. When we think on the unlivable conditions of Colombia, there are many things that makes Colombia not necessarily for the data and for the overall reports a pretty good country. We have a very low income. Even though we are not a poor country, we are a middle income country. Most of the population lives in that frontier between poverty and being middle vulnerable class. But in general, our income is low as compared with Western countries. We have an average median daily income cap about $7 per day. And even though it's low, generally people is able to make a living out of it. We also have an important employment rate. We are low in freedom rank. We are very, very high in this, and this high, it's not good, very high in corruption rank, and the perception of corruption in the government is very high, not only in Colombia, but in Latin America, and so on and so forth. So here we have all different information that is probably information that is captured in different media outlets, in which Colombia is not necessarily well, and none of this information is untrue. It's pretty much true, but it takes us to the other point of this is, what are the livable conditions that someone needs to live a happy and fulfilled life? In many ways, we have been compared to Western countries, particularly the happiest countries, Denmark, Finland, which has very high levels of development, infrastructure, access to housing, safety. We are not in that point. We are quite far from that point. But Colombia, as many other countries in Latin America, are quite livable. Housing is decent. We have high penetration of water, sanitation, sewage, and other necessary services. In general, education is almost universal in primary and secondary level. We have decent health services. So it is not the super development of Western countries, which are always at the top of the happiness ranks, but we have a condition in which people can live quite decently, make their lives, and have a fulfilling life. So this is a point in which we base pretty much our research and our hypothesis. What are the drivers of the high subjective well-being in Colombia? One of them is the folklore theory and Colombia's good energy. You will be able to see what we have expanded in these three theories in a paper that hopefully will be coming up next. But one of the key points is the folklore theory. In Colombia and in general in Latin America, we experience positive emotions quite often. When you ask people how happy you felt yesterday, ratings are quite high. If you ask them, do you feel sad or you feel worried? Yes, of course, people do that, but the affective balance in general is higher. Also, we give a lot of relevance for our social ties and our social bonds. Family is central to all Latin America culture, and we build a relationship based on the family and the community. We're pretty much close to each other. Actually, one pattern you will find across Latin America is that we call people friends using the names of close relatives. For instance, people call each other very informally, like uncle or cousin or papa or mama. That's the way you relate with people outside your family. And that's in a way in which we use the language to extend our family beyond our family ties. Also, and this is an incredible part of Colombia, this is one of the things that I love being here, is we have 21 holidays, around 21 holidays during the day. And those holidays, long weekends, we spend them pretty much with family. We do plans with family, what we're going to do. So it is like having a bunch of mini holidays across the year. We are not the most productive country in the world, but we use that time pretty much socializing. So the party, the carnival, the holidays are a very important ingredient of life. Also the way we share life with others in the food, the large, I mean, for an average eating out with friends, it's several people. It is very few times you get with other ones. So our social circle is very extensive, and we have an approach of life like, let's have fun and let's be happy pretty much all the time. So over to you.
Thank you, Lina. Yeah, so I may have maybe a little bit different yet complementary perspective. So I live in the US. I'm in Philadelphia region, but I do go to Colombia a lot, and now we study Colombia with Lina. We'll get to personal observations later, but in terms of livability. We earlier saw that Colombia scores quite low on those objective indicators like income, poverty, quality of roads, institutional quality like corruption, also infrastructure like quality of roads, and all that is true. These objective material welfare or material comfort indicators are quite low. But at the same time, I would argue that Colombia is livable because it has other great qualities. like freedom, like spontaneity, like great nature, great social connection. So all of that makes Colombia actually quite livable, and that's the livability theory. Then, on the other hand, the alienation theory, that's the Karl Marx idea. I think we have a problem with that in the West, maybe especially in the US, where we're actually quite alienated, I would say. And I didn't really realize that that much before I went to Colombia. But like here, you wake up in the morning, you go to the office, you work the whole day, then you go home, you go to sleep, and then the next day repeat the same thing. You don't really socialize that much. If we do have meetings, if we have social relations, they are mostly economic. They are about some type of business or advancing career, or some project, but they are not really like social relations in a meaningful sense, like they are in Colombia. So I think there's a big problem with alienation in the West, maybe especially in the US, and places like Colombia can really teach us what we have lost, and how alienated we are. We simply may not realize it. And then next up, so that was in general about Colombia, and that's the main thing here again is this apparent paradox or discrepancy between objective conditions like income, infrastructure, and then the poor quality of those objective indicators and the great happiness. But again, I think it can be explained by the fact that we don't really need very good quality of material things. Basic level is enough for livability, and at the same time, in Colombia, there are great things like social connection, nature, time, spontaneity, and being able to be present and enjoy the moment. Whereas in the West, we have this problem with alienation. So that's the overall story here from our research, and then we have a couple specifics. The next one is urban rural analysis. So that's usually my specialty. I look at urban rural differences, and here we have rural Colombia on the left, and on the right we have Bogota, and then we have those smiley emojis at the bottom, and the hypothesis is that it's happier in rural and less happy in urban. And indeed, that's what we were finding with our research. Then there are more pictures. If we go to another slide, there is again a picture of rural Colombia on the left, and then urban Colombia on the right. And in some ways, this urban rural discrepancy may mimic also Latin versus West, maybe especially the US, where it's slower paced, it's more social, it's more connected, it's more natural in Latin America and also in rural areas, whereas in cities, including big city in Colombia, Bogota, it reminds me of Philadelphia. It's very rushed. It's very much about productivity. And then here, one of my favorite slides with chickens. So in cities, people oftentimes live in those cramped spaces. So like on the left, we have this kind of human tower. On the right, we have chicken tower. So people are crammed. It's definitely not happy. Neither chickens are happy here, nor humans. It's not really livable. Then another slide, we have more chickens here. So here are the chickens, and they're in a shed or wherever chickens live. On the right, we have a street in New York City. Again, a similar thing. Whether chickens or humans, they bump into each other. They're not happy. It's crowded. It's about productivity, about speed, about economy. It's not a happy environment. And then we try to look at this hypothesis here across Colombian cities. Bogota is by far the biggest city at about 8 million people. And it does feel kind of Western. If you go to Bogota, there is not that big difference between Bogota and Philadelphia, New York City, London, any big city. Then we have two smaller cities, Medellin and Cali. They're better. They are more Latin, especially Cali. Feel happier. And then there is a bunch of other cities. But the bottom line here is that Bogota is by far the very biggest one, has a large airport, and it does feel quite Western, quite rushed, quite focused on productivity, like in the West. And then we ran our regressions, and what we were finding was that not the other cities, but specifically Bogota. For Bogota, we were finding in a simpler model about 0.3 penalty in happiness on scale from 1 to 10, as compared to rural areas, as compared to places that are less than 10,000 people. And then actually controlling for other things in more elaborate models, it's even bigger, about 0.5. So people in Bogota are 0.5 less happy on scale from 1 to 10 than people in rural areas in Colombia. And then finally, I was thinking to contrast my city here in the U.S., Philadelphia, with Cali. So on the left we have Philadelphia, on the right we have Cali. This is what you see when you get out of the main transportation hub. So that's 30th Street Station in Philadelphia, and that's main transit hub, Terminal de Transporte in Cali on the right. And what you see on the left, it's really business-like. You have towers with offices. It's all very much organized, sanitized. There's no really place to hang out or sit or socialize. Whereas on the right, you can see there are places to sit down, grab coffee, grab some food. You can catch taxi or local bus. It's much more social, much more connected and happier. And the other thing is that we tend to think that that the image on the left is progress, is development, that we want to have more fancy build up business type of infrastructure. Whereas on the right, it's kind of like disorganized and not really developed. But again, from happiness perspective, actually the image on the right is a way to go, because again, you can socialize. It's more friendly, it's more cozy, it's more conducive for happiness. And then I give it back to Lina to look at domains.
Okay. What Adam was presenting was information, that analysis that we are doing, analyzing the differences in life satisfaction and happiness in rural, urban areas using Gallup data. And here we are going to go more like a local angle of the study of subjective well-being. And the research that I'm going to show you uses a data set which is called Calibrando. It's a data set that we have in Cali. To the best of our knowledge, is probably the only data set in Latin America at city level that has such a granular information. The data has been collected for over the 10 years, since 2014 to 2024, and it has an extensive battery of life satisfaction, and it's crossed with different information. And one of the attributes of the data set is we have information for neighborhoods. So one of the papers that probably you will find soon about the work we have done is how different services, public services, like for instance traffic, affects life satisfaction, because we use very granular information at neighborhood level. So that's a paper that probably you will be able to check later. But today we are going to present a preliminary results from a study that we are doing of the domains of life satisfaction. When we think of life satisfaction as a whole, what are the drivers? What are the individual experience that people connect to that life satisfaction? We all know, all the people that we work on subjective well-being data, we know that the R-square of our regressions are pretty small, and it's very difficult to find causalities, but we are moving towards understanding what are those drivers. We know that life satisfaction is quite high, but what is behind those, the life satisfaction? So we are going back to early studies of life satisfaction of domains. We are pretty much taking over that research using a more recent and updated information. And we pretty much have divided the subjective well-being in 4 areas using the literature for that. One are economic domains, other are social domains, environment, like the place where people live, security, and health. As you can see here, the economic domain, it's quite important for the life satisfaction in Cali, the area in which we are studying. The standard of living explains about 14%. Each of these numbers represent a percentage. A job, what people do, and if they are enjoying what they do, it's quite important. Income, and this is something that is very interesting of what happened in Colombia, and I think in general in Latin America, it's way more important, the perception of being well paid, than the income, the objective income per se. And this is quite relevant in societies with high inequality, like Colombia and in general Latin America. The social domain is the second most important, and you can see here that family plays a significant role. Family, the relationship, we ask the people to rate their satisfaction with family relationships, and family gets a very large chunk. Actually, when you analyze the components, analyze individually, family is the largest, followed by relationship, which encompasses the relationship with your partner and friends. And then we have environment. Security, to our surprise, is not that big as other components, given the high crime rates that we have in Colombia, particularly in Cali. Place of living, access to public services, and then we have then we have health, in which is way more relevant mental health than physical health, and this goes online with different research that we have seen everywhere in the world. What are the differences when we compare this with other regions? First is mental health. Usually when we do this type of analysis of the literature review of this analysis, mental health, it will be the largest component to explain the life satisfaction of people. But mental health here reduces when people is more satisfied with the social domain. When people reduces their satisfaction with the social domain, mental health increases. So our hypothesis is the largest, the cushion for the social domain, it is a protective factor for mental health issues. The other thing we find here is the economic dimension, the possibility to access to job is larger than it will be in other developed countries. But this part of the social dimension is one that we are exploring the most, and in relationship with the mental health conditions. And then over to you, Adam, with other analysis we're doing with the Calibrando data.
Great. So again, the same data, data for Cali, and here we're looking at parenthood and happiness. So in general, and in the West, if you have kids, you are less happy, but in Colombia, it's the other way around. So here you can see from this descriptive statistics that people who have kids are happy at 8.35, whereas those without kids are at 8.18. So that was interesting, and it makes sense. Again, in the West, maybe especially in the US, you are rushed. It's all about work, about productivity, income, career success, and there is really not that much time for kids. So that may be one reason why people with kids are less happy in the West and the US. And in Colombia, on the other hand, it's very social, very connected. So it makes sense that having kids would produce more happiness. We can skip those descriptive statistics and go to the graph. So the interesting thing here, and these are the regression predicted values. On y-axis, it's happiness. On x-axis, it's first people without kids, no kids, and then see that yes, having kids. So the bigger happiness is actually for people who are separated or widowed, the green line. There is not much difference in happiness between not having kids and having kids for single and married. That was one interesting result. Then another graph, the next one shows that it does depend on income. And here we separate the sample by good income and not so good income. Red line is good income, and good income is simply more than one minimum wage. And one minimum wage is very low. It's like 1,300,000, 400 pesos, which is like $400 or maybe even less. So as long as you have that minimum income, minimum wage, more than about $400 a month, when you have kids, your happiness goes up, the red line. And the blue line, there is very little, if any, difference in happiness without basic income. And that does make sense. Without basic income, having kids is no fun. This is one of the most interesting results. So here we separate by gender. The blue line is male, red line is female. So actually, fathers are happier than mothers with kids. Maybe one reason they don't have to do that much work in the household when they are babies. Maybe there are other reasons, but it's interesting that between not having and having kids, the happiness goes up more for males than females. For males, goes up from 8.1 to 8.4, whereas for females, only from like 8.2 to 8.35. And then finally, here, freeway interaction. It's by gender and by income. And also very interesting result, the red line and the blue line, they show males. And the red line is good income, and the blue line is poor income, again, below one minimum wage, but below $400 a month. And what we can see, there is huge difference for males depending on their income. If a male is making below one minimum wage and has kids, the happiness drops. If a male makes above minimum wage and has a kid, the happiness increases versus not having kids. The other two lines, yellow and green, that's for females, and there is not that much difference in happiness there. That would conclude the empirical data-based part, and then we have some anecdotal evidence, some observations. Maybe Lina would start. She spent some time in the US and wasn't too happy. And I'm in the US, and when I go to Colombia, I'm happier. So we'll discuss those a little bit.
Okay, our takeaways here. I'll start with this picture. I took this picture of Adam. Adam came to Colombia, I don't know, 3 years ago or something like that. It was right after the COVID epidemic. We didn't know each other. We just get together because the work that we have been doing on subjective well-being, and since then we have become pretty good friends. And Adam came to Colombia. He got a motorcycle, and he has been riding his motorcycle all over the country. And he now is in love with the countryside in one of the greenest areas and departments in the country. So for us, our takeaways is the experience of life satisfaction and subjective well-being in Colombia and in general in Latin America is quite different of the studies we conduct usually in Western countries. We are not so many in Latin America doing research on subjective well-being. So pretty much all the information we have comes from countries that not necessarily represent the experience that we have. I think there are more nuances when studying subjective well-being, which are the cultural part, the social bonds, the relevance of family, and how those social networks helps with mental health. Other our takeaways is mental health and the emotional experience. When you have so much social support, your mental health improves. And also all the emotional, the affective measures in Colombia. We got that people declare constantly they are feeling happy, they are laughing a lot, they are learning new things. So it's a way of experience life in a different way, which is very much shaped by context and by culture, as the case of Latin America. So we are making the call to study more this region of the world because it's quite interesting. We don't have all development that we would like. The government is not necessarily good. There are huge rates of corruption, but even though people is quite happy, and the social connections are not necessarily measured by trust in the community or being voluntary, which is the typical ways in which we measure a social cohesion. Social cohesion in Colombia and Latin America is measured quite differently. So this is pretty much our invitation here. This is Adam's cabin. He is building a cabin in Colombia, and I will let this with Adam, and we will finish with this image.
So this is a friend of mine. She's cooking something here, and the other great thing is like people get together in the evening. It's not disconnected like in the US that you just go home, watch TV, and go sleep. No, like everybody gets together. There is a fireplace. People cook together. They enjoy food. Yeah, and it's really connected and happy. And then
And the cooking pot is that big.
I don't exactly know what she's cooking here, but the point is it's like all natural. You can like grab the vegetables from the land next door, and it's all natural. It's cooked on fire, and it's very social experience.
We were going to stop sharing the screen because we would like to know your comments, your questions to open this conversation.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Lina and Adam. I think, I mean, we're online, so it's always, difficult to make a round of applause, but definitely the heart is there. Thank you very much for this talk. Just before I start, I open the discussion. Let me just remind the audience that if you have a question, you can use the chat, of course, but I think it's better if we have direct interaction. So if you want to raise a question, like raise your virtual hand on Zoom, and then we will give you some space to ask your question. So in the meantime, I'm going to start by again saying thank you very much. It's really important to have this work on Colombia, and I'm going to say more generally on Latin America, because I was working on a survey recently about in economics, which country are we studying on average when it comes to well-being? And I mean, it's not a spoiler. I mean, you won't be surprised. It's the States, it's Germany, and it's the UK. And when it comes to the rest of the world, most of the time people have Gallup data, and then you will find Colombia, sure, but Colombia is going to be one data point, drowned within hundreds of other countries. So it's really great that we're doing this work. First question I have for you guys, it's sort of policy-related question. In the structure of your presentation, you somehow opposed, the US, let's say, to Colombia. So something about in Colombia, maybe the objective indicators are not great, but the subjective ones are good, while, in the States, it might be the other way around. So I'm just wondering, is there sort of way in between where everything could be great, or do we have to see this as a trade-off? What are your thoughts on this?
I wouldn't say there is necessarily a trade-off. there, in some sense, there is like if we focus too much, say, on perfect built environment and on economic growth, we tend to overwork. We tend to just focus on economic side, and there is limited number of hours. There is opportunity cost. We don't do other things like socializing, like traveling, and those kind of things. In Europe, maybe it's arguably it's better. In European countries, that there is more work-life balance. Um, so that would be a really quick answer. We have a paper on that. If anybody interested, send us email. We'll send you a draft.
But
Yeah.
I will add something very quick on that. It is, for us, we know that the government fails in many ways. So we have a very private dimension of happiness. It is like what happens with my family, with my community, with the closest circle. When we add to the regulations the information about what happened in the country of corruption, of course it reduces. And of course, people know about it, but somehow we have been able to keep ourselves away from what is happening with the government. And still, our individual life satisfaction is quite high, but our satisfaction with government is very low. So one of the things is when it goes to the policy message that everything is great here because people are happy, no, and we have the data to prove it. People, it's less happy in poor neighborhoods, is less happy in economic constraints, is less happy when they perceive a poor management in the country, in the local or national government, and the data is pretty clear on that. So just
I see.
to add.
But
Okay.
I'm just a follow up, and then I'm gonna leave the floor to Tim. Just to follow up on this, I was actually thinking about this. I was like, is it because Colombian knows that that the government is failing, that then a sort of coping mechanism or sort of response mechanism is to say, in this case, let's focus on something smaller, like the family, like our community, as a sort of response to this. So I would be very curious to know more about this. But Tim, please unmute yourself and go for it.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Adam and Lina, so much. Really interesting. I'm a happiness researcher, and I lived in Colombia for a year, and I too have completely fallen in love with the country. I had two questions that sort of tie into my own experiences there, but I really would love to hear if these are things that you've been looking at in your research. The first, and Lina touched on it, this idea of trust, because one of the things that I found very different and very interesting was that there was, even for somebody moving into a very small town, within a short period of time, there was a sense of interconnectedness, a sense of being sort of part of this network, this fabric of the community. And yet I would repeatedly hear, that you can't trust that person, that you can't trust that person. So there was almost this sense, whereas in the US, I feel like social connection is very associated and very related to trust, where there was almost these two components that were working differently, that there could be these very strong social connections, even with people that you couldn't necessarily trust. And I don't mean to suggest that, there was a sense that you couldn't trust anyone. That wasn't the situation at all. But it just felt like those two things were sort of separated, whereas I think they're much more connected in the US. And the one other thing, if I can drop two questions in there at the same time, the use of time. This was just continued to blow my mind of sort of how our whole conception of I got to get somewhere. And Adam mentioned this. I have a meeting. I have many appointments today. I would say that to people, and they would look at me like I had three heads of like, well, why did you come to a meal at 1 if you had to be somewhere at 5? Whereas to me, it would make perfect sense that a meal would take an hour or two. So I would love to hear any thoughts you have on those topics. And again, thank you so much. It was I was really looking forward to this webinar.
And if you don't mind, I will take on the trust question. Latin America is the region with lowest trust in general. And the trust has rippling effects. People does not trust on institutions. And the trust in institution is quite low in the police, in the local government, the national government. And pretty much that trust ripples into society. We also have a high rates of crime, so people do not trust, and this is a problem in the market, because when you want to go and sell a second-hand car, you prefer to use a dealer for not dealing with issues with trust, because you don't trust the people that will come. So there is untrust on institutions, there is untrust on the people in which we don't know personally, but people we know personally, our friends of community, trust is quite high. So within the communities, when the people know each other, trust could be higher, but trusting other people, it will be more difficult. But we have a bunch of strategies it's cultural strategies to know each other. We are pretty talkative. We are very into talking to the other person. So at the beginning, it could be low trust, but as soon as we start the conversation, that people quite easily gets into the inner circle. And regarding the use of time, I wouldn't say that I don't have meetings one hour next to the other. I think I work a lot too, as it will be in another country, but we perceive the time differently. For instance, we have 2 hours for lunch. And usually we prefer to have lunch with other people. I mean, like having lunch in front of the computer by our own, that's not something that we culturally do. We prefer to be with other people. We prefer to take that time for socializing. And the socializing time, it's quite important. I mean, we are busy, as we might be in another parts. Probably might also change based on your occupation and your income level, but they use some time for spending with other people. It's quite relevant. My mom, for instance, she could spend hours talking on the phone with my relatives, and that's her preferred use of time.
Thank you. I see that Adam, do you want to address very quickly maybe the question in the chat? I don't know if you've seen the comment of Pasquale.
Trying to reply in chat, but here on the use of time, real quick, that's something that definitely blew my mind. Like in the US, it's all about speed, about efficiency. We go somewhere from A to B. We just want to get as fast as we can. Whereas, like if we do that in Colombia, we actually appreciate the process. We see the views on the way, and it's so different. The downside, of course, is that everything is late in Colombia. You cannot plan anything. But like we overdo in the West with planning. Like we have appointments for everything. Like we schedule things, we put it on calendar. You cannot just like knock on somebody's door and like, hey, let's go grab lunch. No, we like plan and have appointments for like very little thing. We could learn that from Colombians.
Parviz, see that your hand is raised.
Yes, thank you, Anthony. Great presentation. Thank you so much. One of the things I wanted to mention was the questions in the chat, but you have access to those, so please do address them when you get a moment. But I have a very quick question of my own, relating to Adam's earlier part of the presentation, where there were some very telling pictures of beautiful landscapes and then city streets, congested city streets. And there's a strong implication, and it was mentioned that the levels of SWB are much higher in the rural neighborhoods as compared to the city. The question I have is, and I have no reason to doubt you, I believe you, but how do you square that observation with the fact that Colombia has one of the highest levels of rural-urban migration anywhere within Latin America? I don't think it has the highest, but it's one of the highest. So if happiness, so I think the answer has to do with something like, well, how are we measuring happiness, and what is really what is seen as being very important to those who migrate, make the decision to move. So why are they giving up all this happiness in order to move to the city, where they could end up living in a shanty town, in a slum dwelling, and become miserable as a consequence? Is it asymmetric information, lack of knowledge as to what lies ahead, or is it something else? Or are they willing to risk earning much higher levels of income and sacrifice some happiness? So what's going on?
One of the major drivers for the migration, the rural-urban migration, is the conflict, the armed conflict. We had a peace agreement a little bit before the COVID, so we haven't been able to be in how the rural area unfolds and develops and creates their own local economies. But before that, the high rates, which were very high, it was very much driven by displacement. And actually now one of the things that we have been seeing is, for instance, one department is called Guaviare, very, very highly recommended for you if you want to see something that is top in terms of the exoticness of a jungle and history. Guaviare is a place that we as Colombian, we couldn't visit because of the armed conflict. And as a consequence of the peace agreement, there is a huge wave of tourism. There is local communities, there is local developments, economic developments that support the livelihood of many people in those communities. I don't know the data. I don't have a glimpse on that, but my take on that, it will be that after the peace agreement, the migration reduced importantly.
My really quick answer to that would be there is similar pattern across the world. In the US and other countries, people would migrate, and yet the least happy place in the US is New York City. It's Philadelphia. Same thing in UK. It's least happy in London, yet people flock there. In the West, one explanation would be we live in a consumerist society where what matters is income and consumption, and those are greater in cities, and people move there. And my point of view is that people are not super rational. They often choose things that may not be good for them. But it's a great question. It will be a long discussion.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We are getting close to the end, and I see that, Adam, you have been mastering the art of responding questions in live and at the same time in the chat. So that really makes our life with Parviz very, very easy. So I don't see any more hand raised. So I'm just going to bring in one last point. I would like to just have your insight on. So it's something I mentioned earlier, like the fact that we've been working mostly on the UK, the US, and Germany. And thanks to your talk today, I discovered I somehow know a little bit better about data that is available in Colombia, but not only in Colombia, in other Latin America countries. So would you have some suggestions for researchers? Let's assume tomorrow I want to start a paper on Latin America. Which kind of data shall I use? Where can I find them? Just maybe some examples to further even the analysis of these countries.
For Colombia and for Mexico, there are very good information, subjective information, and it's available on the National Statistical Offices. It is you can download it anywhere in the world you want to use it. You might need a local for the translation, for understanding the meaning of the question, but the data is available. And Mexico, they have a component in large national surveys which is called Viare, and the information they have is amazing.
And is it like panel? Is it cross section?
It is a household surveys and is cross section. It is cross section.
Okay, yeah, because that's when at the beginning of your presentation when you showed us the different points over time, I was like, oh my god, if this is panel,
no, it is not panel. The same people. It is not the same people. It's the same question across different years, and actually it's collected in different points during the year.
I see.
Households during the year. I think there are 3 or 4 waves per year.
I see. Oh, this is interesting. Yeah, Parviz?
Sorry, thank you, Anthony. One very quick question again. This research is very exciting, fascinating, but whenever I encounter research that has a strong empirical side to it, and there are contrasts that are being explained, my thought turns to policy. So a question I have is, you've identified some of the problems, you've identified differences in different parts of Colombia, and Colombia to the US and Colombia to Europe elsewhere. So what would be the kind of policy recommendation that emerges out of this? So how can the less happy cities, countries, people be encouraged to be less unhappy and more happy? Are there any policies that emerge from this research? Because it would be a pity if the answer was no. I'm hoping you have something that might help.
Well, the research on happiness in Colombia and Latin America is quite new. There are few of us who are doing research in Latin America, and you need an important bulk of research and data to be able to inform policy. So the research is just starting. We have been able to set up the stage, and the discussion is slowly getting into national entities. And one of the reasons is getting into the policy discourse is because Colombia and Mexico and Brazil, they are into the OECD countries. So it provokes a different and a bigger level discussion. So thanks given to the reason that Colombia was getting into the OECD countries, we start measuring life satisfaction. That was back in 2017. Otherwise, the country wouldn't be collecting the information. That said, what to do with that information, it's a different discussion. The research we are conducting is pretty much trying to inform on several fronts. One, the perception of inequality. It's way larger, more important, the perception of inequality than the actual inequality. And Colombia and Latin America is a very unequal country. So what to do in terms of inequality, what to do in terms of the perception of people have on that. The other one is on mental health. Part of the research that is not shown here, but is part of the research in the center that I'm working with. We are working a lot with mental health, and we are finding that people who live in more deprived areas and neighborhoods, they present they self-report with more frequency stress, anxiety, and depression. And it has direct effect on what the local government can do. And the third aspect we are seeing and recommending on that is subjective well-being and life satisfaction happens in your city. So in terms of policy, it's way more relevant studying cities than studying the country. Whatever the country does in terms of well-being, it will be lost quite easily for an individual, because the life satisfaction in terms of policy, it is grasped when you have nearby park, when you have a center to connect with the community in your neighborhood, when you have cultural activities in which you can enjoy for free, or any other subjective well-being policies that will respond to whatever we are finding in the research. So we are just starting.
Okay, that's good.
It's difficult to sell, and it was very difficult to sell before COVID. After COVID, it's getting easier because of the mental health issues we are finding.
Great, thank you for that. Appreciate it. Thank you.
And this is very promising, and it feels like the perfect way actually to close this Q&A. So again, Lina and Adam, thank you very much for your presentation and for your responses. Jill, leave you the floor for some concluding remarks.
Muchísimas gracias, Lina. Thank you so much, Adam. That was excellent. I just want to give a sneak peek preview that we are actually planning a regional conference that focuses on Latin America well-being and happiness, and that is slated for 2026 in Buenos Aires, Argentina. So hopefully we'll have some announcements coming up about that. We encourage all of you to consider participating. In the meantime, though, we do have 2 events coming up: the regional conference in Africa in 2 weeks, and then we have our online winter virtual conference coming up in February. So those 2 important events we hope you participate with. We will be sending out a recording of this, plus the presenter materials and their contact information via email shortly. In the meantime, please do subscribe to our YouTube page, ISQOLS YouTube page, so you can keep updated on all of our notifications. Thank you so much, Lina and Adam. That was excellent. Thank you everyone for participating, and we hope you stay in touch and connected with ISQOLS.
Thank you. Have a good one, and thanks for being here. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much. Adios.
Adios.
Adios.